Hi, this is Real World Audio and we are continuing our pure darling single-ended triode amplifier build, looking at its power supply. So I think I kept on forgetting mentioning that for the pure darling, basically the schematics and everything is the same as the baby darling version, except what I'm going through now. These are the changes compared to a baby darling amplifier. So here we go. Another big change compared to the baby darling is that here we have full wave, tube rectification. In the baby darling, it's also full wave rectified, but it's a full wave solid state rectified. So there we have just a pair of UF ultrafast diodes, and here I give you two choices. One of them, either pick your choice, like a 5AR4 vacuum tube or a 5R4GY vacuum tube, one or the other, and depending on which one you pick, because they drop different voltages, we will choose different input capacitance. Because here this will be a semi-choke input power supply. That's also a difference from the baby darling, that we have choke input. It is not full choke input because that would require even higher input voltage, and I don't want to put most of you out to that situation. And so what I am doing here is we are putting a tiny baby capacitor, like between 1.5 microfarad to 2.2 microfarad, and that will basically make the first choke behave almost like a choke input supply, because this capacitor, what it does not push your power supply to work as a capacitor input supply. So it means that when the downstream it receives the voltage and current, it will not be a scenario where the current is leading, like in the case of a cap input power supply, but it will be where the voltage is leading, like in the case of a choke input supply. So this is a little trick for choke input supply, and also I can recommend doing this just using a tiny little capacitor in the front, because this gives you two things. One of them is that when you have a fully choke input supply, then it's easy to have an turn on over voltage spike. So when you turn on your amp, then it spikes up. So let's say your the voltage in your amplifier is, let's say, 300 volt, and you get a 400 volt spike when you turn on. If you add these tuning capacitors in front of your choke, then it avoids that that turn on spike. And there's a fantastic thing with it, that based on the value of that tuning capacitor, you can dial in, you can adjust the input voltage of your power supply within quite a wide range. And I would say, okay, this is lesson for another day. I don't want to get your attention away from here. But the thing is that if you use the 5AR4 vacuum tube, then you will need a 1.6 microfarad tuning capacitor. For that one, you need a 2.2 microfarad tuning capacitor. And I give you a third option, and this is a crazy option. And I'm quite sure that 99.9% of you will hear about this option the first time. And this is a hybrid rectification, where we use vacuum tube paralleled by a solid state diode. And I'm sure that many of you who are old-timer amplifier builders have heard of hybrid tube and diode power supply, but there they are put in series. And here, no, they are placed in parallel. And that's what my mentor, Stu Ono, he discovered this operation, and he started using it. And even those people who have been building amps like for 30 years, when they hear about this proposition, they say that this cannot work, this is impossible. And Stu told me that there was someone on Joe List who, when he posted this on Joe List about 15-20 years ago, then he got like a really agitated comments on that. And then that person who commented on him then came down and to visit Stu, and he showed this for him, and the person was still thinking that no, you are just saying that you have solid state diodes paralleling the rectifier tube. So Stu just grabbed the rectifier, of course, with some cloth material, because if you grab a rectifier barehanded, it will give you a serious burn. So he just grabbed it and yanked it out from the amp while it was on and giving music, and without the rectifier tube it continued playing music. And that's when the person realized that, oh, this does really work. And then when you do that, you pull out the vacuum tube, you can hear the sound instantly changing and becoming gritty and unrefined, and the harmonic details missing. And it's kind of like it's like little bit turning more into a solid state amp. And then when you put the tube back in, as soon as the heater film of the rectifier warms up, you hear the sound warming up too, that grittiness, that graininess going away, and then the harmonic details coming back. And the advantage of adding that solid state diode in parallel to the rectifier is that now you are ready to use any rectifier tube that has the same pin out and the same filament voltage as the 5AR4. So you can use 5T4, 5AR4, 5R4GY, 5U4, 5R4, the potato masher tube, any one of them, because it will be the solid state diodes that dictate the voltage drop. And this combination of solid state diode and vacuum tube works because what happens is that the solid state diode makes it much easier for the vacuum tube to work, because it's dictating the voltage drop. But here come the engineers, and they say that if the diode drops less, then it means it's conducting and the vacuum tube is doing nothing. But that's not true, because the conductance of the rectification elements depends on the phase angle of the conducted voltage and current, and vacuum tubes and the ultrafast diode or any other diode you use, they have different conductive properties at different phases. So when you see the wave going up and down, like voltage and current going up and down, at each part of that wave, when we are going up or down, there are places where the vacuum tube is giving you better juice, and there are other places where the solid state diode is giving you better juice. And actually the solid state diode gives us more of an oomph by having unlimited current carrying capacity. So when the current is rising, that's when the solid state diode takes over. But when the current is falling and the solid state diode is falling off, that's when the rectifier tube is still in its element, and it picks up the slack that the diode cannot really follow. But for those of you So for everyone, I recommend to try this out, if you never try this out, to parallel your tube with the diode. Of course, this will mean that you will not have a slow start on anymore. As soon as you turn on your amplifier or your high voltage supply, then you will instantly have the high voltage, while if you keep it to pure tube rectification, then you will have a slow start for your tubes. I would say in this case this slow start doesn't really matter because we are using low voltages, and this tube 1626 is a very sturdy little tube, so it doesn't matter for the power tube whether the turn on is slow or fast. And also the input tube is an ultra sturdy tube, and that really doesn't mind at all any sort of turn on speed. So that's about for the rectification. And now let's look at the power transformer. This is different from the baby darling. So in the baby darling we have a lower current capacity, quite a bit lower. So this Hammond option, this is a big Hammond, and the key parts in it, that if you want to look for a different transformer, it needs to be 500 volts center tapped, or the other way of writing it down would be 250-0-250. That's another way of saying 500 volt center tapped. And we also need a 5 volt center tapped filament for the rectifier tube, at least 3 amps. Here we have 6 amp. I like to have that extra current capacity because it does not stress out the transformer. And 6.3 volts filament for the input tube. And or if you want to really knock yourself out and you have the opportunity to build the pure darling to the highest standard possible, I recommend the Hashimoto PT180 power transformer. Going to Hashimoto's website, it is this baby PT180. You can order it with any of these primary voltages, pick the voltage that's present in your country, and this is, you see, I told you that 500 VCT, that's one way of saying 500 volt center tapped secondary, but this is another way. But it's kind of like hard to get by because it says 280-250-0-250-280. So it means that this transformer is center tapped, so that 0 tells you that it has a center tap. And then it has 2 additional connections on the side of that center tap, and those are 250-250. So that's 500 volt center tap. But it has an additional one at 280-280. So basically it's 560 volts center tap, and we will be using the 250 volts taps. But if you decide that this amp was junk or you want something else, and here are those power tube recommendations that Hashimoto recommends you. So if you want to build a 6V6, 6L6, 6BQ5 amp, let's say 6BQ5, you can build your audio note auto clone using this power transformer, for example. So if the darling was not your cup of tea and you decide you want to make it into an audio note auto clone, then you can use this power transformer. And well, I would say the only reason to change the 1626 tube to the 6BQ5 is to get higher output power, and eventually this has enough current, 300 milliamps DC, so that you can run a pair of 6BQ5s on this, or even like you can run 2 6BQ5s per channel. And what else? So here we go. It also has 3 6.3 volt secondaries, and we will be using only 2 of them, and it means that each input tube will have its own dedicated secondary filament. I mean, it's filament winding, which is absolutely smashing. And of course, in this case, you reference the center tap of each transformer to each corresponding vacuum tube cathode, and that will give us a little advantage over the common filament voltage, filament heating for the both input tubes when you go for the Hammond. However, the Hammond has a little benefit when we look at the rectifier tube. That one has a 6 amperes current handling capacity, and the Hashimoto has only 3 amps. But I would not really worry about the 3 amps, because we will need only 2 amps for the 5AR4 or 5R4 varieties, and it's only the 5U4G and its relatives that use the 3 amp winding. But as you see, this iron will set you back quite a bit of money, about twice as much as the Hammond. So that's why I said that this is like the primo version. So if you want, you can build the pure darling with all Hashimoto iron. It will cost you quite a lot of money, in the several $1,000 total cost. But if you want to buy would want to buy the same thing in a commercial amplifier, if it would be available, it would be at the cost of $10,000. So just with spending a few $1,000, you will be the proud owner of that level of craftsmanship and parts quality. Of course, craftsmanship will depend on you, how you execute the build, but the rest of it, topology and part selection, that will be top notch. So you will also need an extra octal socket for the rectifier tube, and here we go. The input filter capacitor, if you go for the hybrid version, which means you also use solid state rectifier in parallel with the vacuum tube, it's 1.5 microfarad. If you use 5AR4 alone, no solid state diode, then it's 1.6 microfarad. And 5R4 GY tube, actually this would be my preference. I would recommend to build it with this tube for 2 reasons. It is an absolutely wonderful sounding tube. It will knock the socks out of any 5AR4 variety except the original Blackburn Mallard version, not the Mallard reissued. That's a far cry from the original Mallard. If you have original Mallard 5AR4s or other versions then which are equivalent or better, then I can recommend it. If not, then it would be too expensive to buy it. Just buy the 5R4GY, use a little higher input capacitance, and you are at the same level. For these capacitors, you can use the Obligato Premium Film Capacitor 1 kilovolt rated version, use that, and or you can use the Miflex KPCU 600 volt rated copper foil capacitor. I mean, not foil, that's film, that's oil-filled copper film capacitor. That's the highest grade capacitor, but that's really only for a cost no object version. If you are building the full Hashimoto, then just instead of any obligatos, just go for the Miflex KPCU. So let's just have a look at the cost of that. So for the Miflex KPCU 1.5 microfarad variety, $100 basically. And if you want the 2.2 microfarads, $132, so it's not very cheap, but I can tell you it's worth the money if you want, and if you can spend it, then try it out. It will go well. And then for the, and also of course all of these capacitors that I'm listing there, these are oil capacitors. These are oil film capacitors, and they do sound really, really well in this position. And for the pi filters, you can use the same Hammond chokes if you want to. They are really cheap, but they will do the job really. And use DC link capacitors. These are Kemet DC link, 130 microfarad, 500 volts DC. Let me just add that here. You can use higher, but these will be pretty big, pretty large capacitors. And the Kemet DC link capacitors are the only ones that now I use for power supplies. I used to use oil-filled capacitors like vintage new old stock ASC capacitors, and those really huge oilers. So I used to use the 47 microfarad, what was that, 1.1 kilovolt rated, those caps. But those are humongous. It will be bigger than any transformer in your amplifier, and if you want to use those, then it will look like a tanker. One day I will show you those capacitors. They are absolute monsters. But my mentor, Wesley, he's my other mentor besides two. He told me that when they looked at these capacitors, then they have noticed that as they age, the phase at which they deliver the voltage and current, they go out of phase. So even though they will measure with ordinary instruments pretty well, but as they age, their sound will change quite a bit, and that's why I recommend the DC link capacitors, because they sound quite a bit better than the aged film oil capacitors. I mean those really big paper and oil capacitors. So you will need two of those caps, and by the way, it will be much easier to work with. And the good thing with these DC link caps is they will last forever, and they can handle almost unlimited overload in voltage. So for example, anyway, I don't want to go off topic now. And then if you want, you can for a choke selection and capacitor selection, you can go for the Hashimoto C6-250W and get a pair of them. Let's have a look at that. Let's scroll down. Which is that? C60. That's the one. You see this iron? It's actually many of the Hashimoto chokes are like double chokes, so there's two coils inside, and if you put them in series, then you'll get 6 Henry inductance, and if you put the two coils in parallel, then you have 1.5 Henry inductance. But you see in the first case that 6 Henry is rated at 250 milliamp, and if you parallel them, then you will get double the current handling capacity, but 4 times lower inductance. So we can actually use this double coil thing to our benefit. So what we will do, and what we can do, is that for the first pi filter, which gets the voltage from the tuning capacitor. So here's the tuning capacitor that's feeding that first choke. So this one, we put the 2 coils in series, so we have the 6 Henrys here. And for the second pipe filter, we can distribute the 2 coils and put 1 coil on the hot at the plus side of the B plus, and we put the other coil on the ground. And then you will have a common mode choke, and then use the advantage of the common mode noise cancellation. And then that's like a huge benefit. And yep, so that's how you can use the 2 Hashimotos if you go for that. But when you look at it, it's not a cheap ride. $250 each, so you need 2. That's about $500 plus shipping from Japan. That won't be cheap either, and that's only just the choke, right? So you will end up racking up quite a bill with Hashimoto if you want all your iron to come from Hashimoto. What I would recommend is to have like a good budget version, is to use maybe just the output transformer from Hashimoto and use Hammond for power transformer and the chokes, and that will still give you like 90% of what you would get if you would go all Hashimoto. And of course, if you want to go all Hashimoto, then you absolutely need to have these bypass caps on these de-sealing capacitors, and these are like, use 1 microfarad or bigger for bypass, so you will end up with this cost like getting, so let's say you are using the 5R4GY pure rectification, then you would need a capacitor and pay out $132 for it, and get 2 more of this and bypass each of the de-sealing caps with this capacitor to speed it up even more. And then you will spend, let's see, $400 on the power supply capacitor alone, plus the de-sealing cap, plus the $500 for the chokes, plus the de-sealing cap. So it means that just the power supply alone, without the power transformer, is $1,000 plus shipping. Add the Hashimoto power transformer and the extra 12-volt filament transformer, which is not much, but you will end up paying about $1,500 for the power supply alone. And if you are holding your hand, oh my god, why am I wasting so much money with power supply? And I tell you why. Because the power supply is even more important than your amplifier bit, and this is where 95% of the commercial amps are lacking, and that's why you can just boost them up tremendously, is improve the power supply. And I can tell you that without a good and pure power supply, there is no pure darling. If you skip here and you just want to think that it's the signal section that matters alone, then you are for a very rude awakening, because it's the power supply that is literally almost everything, because you need clean power, clean and immediate power. And if your power supply can supply that, then you have pretty much everything for success, that what you need. And basically that concludes the pure darling build. I think it is also time for me to make new schematics, because well, you can look at the baby darling schematics with these modifications, but I'm pretty sure that all of you want to see how the schematics looks like exactly for the pure darling, and I haven't drawn it down yet, but I will draw it down for you. So oh my god, almost half an hour. This is record long video. I hope it won't crash my phone and it will transfer. So please like, subscribe, and build the amp. It's really awesome. And at one point in time I will build this pimped out Darling amp, pure Darling, with the full Hashimoto and everything, but first I need to pay back my mortgage. I cannot do that until then. So thank you, bye bye.